El mendigo chupacabras.
¿Qué tal? Muy buenos días. Faltan ahora 20 minutos para que sean las 12 del mediodía. Hoy día tenemos el placer de volver a encontrarnos con un gran periodista que se ha destacado tras los años. Como parte de Narco News en el pasado y también como autor del libro The House of Death o Dispatches from the House of Death. Platicamos con él casi exactamente un año atrás y ahora mismo pues le he dado la invitación para que nos cuente de algo que él descubrió hace más de 20 años atrás que ahora se ha filtrado a los medios convencionales. Así que Bill Conroy, siempre un placer en platicar con usted. Always nice to speak with you. It's been about a year since we've been on the air, and really enjoyed your book, Dispatches from the House of Death. I've been a longtime fan of Narco News. I sincerely miss that as a source. Man, you guys did some fantastic journalism back in the day.
Yeah, it was a rock and roll outfit, Sam, for sure.
It was incredible. And one of the things that you brought to light way before anybody else was about an operation called Mayan Jaguar, and that's one of the things that we're going to discuss today. Una de las cosas que él sacó a luz fue de un operativo encubierto por el gobierno de Estados Unidos, algo que se tituló Mayan Jaguar. So I guess, where should we start there? There's a lot of details here. In a nutshell, what was Mayan Jaguar? What was the supposed intention, according to the U.S. government?
Well, it was a two-prong operation. On the U.S. side of the border, it was run by ICE, and ICE was used as basically a cover for the whole operation, with the ostensible purpose that they would, they would sell planes to drug trafficking organizations, and then track the planes with transponder devices, not the drugs, just the planes. And then ostensibly they would somehow bust the drugs once they crossed the U.S. border. The problem, though.
You mind if I translate that there? Because I don't want people to miss those details, because I think that's critical to understand the entire thing that we're discussing today. Aquí en Estados Unidos, este operativo encubierto comenzó más o menos hace 20 años atrás, en este lado de la frontera por ICE, por tapar lo que hacía la DEA, y supuestamente lo que hacían es que colocaban transbordadores para indicar la ubicación de avionetas, para supuestamente rastrear cargas de drogas y a los capos. Y vendían estas avionetas a los capos y supuestamente iban a poder seguir detrás de ellos y hacer arrestos y procesarlos. Sin embargo, no sucedió de tal manera. Okay, so DEA the DEA was involved, ICE was involved on this side of the border, and it all looked pretty until...
Well, DEA wasn't involved. It was ICE.
Okay, so it actually started with ICE.
Yeah, DEA is the one that really blew the whistle on it because, turf wars and this ICE operation made no sense. I'll tell you why if you want to translate that right now. I'll tell you why.
Okay, muy bien. Así que hizo una aclaración de que todo comenzó con ICE, pero la DEA, ya que había cierta guerra entre ciertas agencias gubernamentales, trató de señalarle el dedo a ICE por la corrupción que hacía. Y ahora nos va a contar la razón por la cual que esto sucedió. So what happened? Why did the DEA decide to pull the plug on the whole thing and show what happened?
Well, there was the biggest problems were, number one, the tracking devices were only on the planes, not the drugs. So these planes, land in the plazas along the border first before they go into the U.S. border, offload the drugs. So no way to get the drugs. Even if you did get a bust, this whole operation was not coordinated or approved by any of the foreign countries it was going through. So it violated international law. And it wasn't coordinated with DEA. So, even if they did get a bust, it would likely not stand up in the court. Proof of that, 4 years this thing ran that we know of, and before it was maybe reiterated. No single indictment was according to the prosecutors, the U.S. prosecutors, they didn't, and even ICE, when I talked to them, said nothing came of this. So it didn't work to get the drugs. So what was it about? And that's what we really dug into.
Muy bien, nos cuenta de que sí se colocaron esos transbordadores, ¿no? Para transmitir la ubicación de las avionetas dentro de cada aeronave. Pero la cosa es que los pilotos aprovechaban para llevar cargas de drogas, se aterrizaban antes de llegar a las fronteras límites, pero descargaban las drogas y seguían su camino. Y la cosa es que, a pesar de todo, nunca se utilizó este operativo para procesar a ninguno. Y además no hubo ningún acuerdo con los gobiernos latinoamericanos en donde se operaba el programa del gobierno estadounidense. Y la DEA obviamente se enceló de lo que hacía ICE en su territorio. So as I understand, I guess you could say the DEA was probably a little bit jealous of some of the powers that ICE was getting into their territory and probably decided to make sure that everybody knew at least a little bit about what was going on there.
Well, that's how I got the story. It leaked to me through DEA. I can't say whom, but yes, at the highest levels, they were upset with this. But here's the real beef. What they were really upset at, and they knew, is this had to be an intelligence operation. Overseas, across our borders, CIA is God. And, or the various offshoots of the intelligence community with the Department of Defense.
Wow.
So, multiple sources told us that the real purpose outside the U.S. of this operation was to track the planes for intelligence reasons, because, they can set up surveillance where they land, they can track who's on them, who they're dealing with. And the criminal world, the terrorist world, and the corruption in government world all meet in this area. So it's like a field day for intelligence gathering. So they were convinced, and the CIA, was at that time under the Bush administration, really targeted on terrorism. So the CIA doesn't care if drugs get into the country, in the interest, from their point of view, of national security. So this is a case of a national security, outweighing the war on drugs. And
wow.
That creates the hypocrisy.
And that's a huge conflict between two huge problems, I think, within the government. Nos cuenta de que todo comenzó durante la administración de George Bush con la CIA, que realmente reina fuera de Estados Unidos en todo, con tal de recabar inteligencia para rastrear el flujo de las drogas y supuestamente para procurar mayor seguridad para Estados Unidos. Y entonces así fue la idea y la táctica que emplearon. Y entonces también puso en contra dos ideas claves de la administración en ese entonces: la guerra en contra de la droga, en contra de, supuestos problemas con la seguridad. Y entonces se vieron cara a cara con este operativo encubierto. So you have a potential explosive situation on your hand. You've got government bureaucrats. You have something that was never authorized by Congress in any way. You have international relations in the way. I mean, there's so many different factors that could blow up and go wrong.
Yeah, and you also, people forget this, but, George Bush II brought back a bunch of the players from Iran-Contra into his administration. Poindexter, Negroponte.
Oh, you're correct about that. I think that's a very valuable point. Dice que otra cosa, el George Bush, el menor, ¿no? El papá, trajo a su administración varios que funcionaron durante la época de Irán Contra, en la época de Ronald Reagan, que conocían muy bien el manejo de la venta de drogas y de muchas cosas sucias de parte de Estados Unidos en esa época. And that's damning in and of itself.
Yeah, it was at the time. Like Elliot Abramson served as director of national intelligence.
One of the worst war criminals the United States has ever had, in my opinion. But I just had to add that there.
Yeah, well, this was what was going on. Now, the Rolling Stone came out with a big story a couple weeks back, or late September, I guess it was. And the story, there was no problems factually with the story, and the problem is they only covered half of it. They had no, clearly from the story, talked to nobody in the intelligence community or had sourcing there other than the PR department for the CIA, which puts out a standard line going back to the coverage of Gary Webb.
Right. Estamos hablando acerca de cómo la revista Rolling Stone volvió a sacar a luz este problema, pues este dilema, ¿no? Hace un par de semanas atrás. Pero el gran problema de Rolling Stone, a diferencia de Narco News, es que no entrevistaron a personas realmente involucradas. Solo entrevistaron a funcionarios oficiales representando la CIA y otras cosas, así que no vimos todos los pormenores que pudo sacar a luz gracias a sus fuentes y contactos el señor Bill Conroy en Narco News. And so it was kind of a light version of all of the work you had done in about 14 different chapters in Narco News.
You said that, but I would agree.
Well, I remember reading it, and as I say, wow, I mean, some of the memories came back, and the anger as well, that our government would lie to us, would be involved in such things like this. But I guess it's not surprising, especially after Iran-Contra, especially after seeing what they did in the 1950s with all of their nasty infiltration of Central American and South American governments.
Let me add one more thing. That was in the Rolling Stone story. It was one line, but they didn't develop it. I mean, it just dropped in there, and then, they went on to contend it was all an ICE operation that was bungled, which was true, but they didn't, like I said, report the other half. That line is from some ICE memo they got, I think from a government report that they landed, that said Mayan Jaguar was a coordinated interagency task force developed by the intelligence community.
Wow.
Through all the reporting we did on it, but for some reason the reporter just, thought it was...
Didn't advance that line.
Yeah, it was just dropped in there. It was against the premise of the story, so it wasn't developed, as I see it anyway. And, also there were, many, many government reports that they didn't have. And they linked to at least one of the reports we dug up without credit. And then they, linked to two of our stories. I don't know, I got a email the day the story was published from the reporter who said, just want to give you a heads up, we cracked this wide open, basically. And I was like, okay. And it was basically confirmation that they relied on our reporting at Narco News for their story.
As a primary source. But of course they didn't mention that.
Well, really low in the story, they mentioned Narco News like kind of just out of the blue, saying that we talked to ICE and ICE confirmed Mayan Jaguar. But then they went on to say that ICE spokesperson wouldn't talk to him, and they got no comment from ICE. So I think they had to use it because ICE wouldn't talk to him, and that was the only thing they had. But yeah, I'm glad the story was done. I don't think the story is inaccurate. I mean, the facts in the story are accurate. It's just they didn't,
they didn't advance it, as journalists. There's a little bit of a lack of understanding as to where to take the target of the story, in my opinion, in developing it. Yeah. And, I suspect it's a younger reporter who just doesn't have the background in this stuff. It's pretty complicated. A lot of years to get sourcing and understand this world. I mean, and not without some risk. So you can't just wing it or just listen to the government sources and, because they all have competing interests. I think that's crucial. Thank you for mentioning that. I'm going to translate that. Dice que el periodista supuestamente habría sido muy joven y no avanzó ni desarrolló la historia, aunque sí le dio un poquitito de crédito a Narco News, pero tal vez porque no pudo conseguir o concretar ciertos hechos anteriormente. Porque esto sí es algo muy enredado, que tiene muchos matices, pero es algo que él hizo hace como 20 años atrás. And I guess that takes us to today. We've seen this happen with Iran-Contra. We saw this happen with Rápido y Furioso, Fast and Furious, I guess was the name in English. We're seeing these things happen time and time and time again. What do you think is happening now that we don't know about? Or what do we might have an inkling of what is going on, but may not have a complete picture of?
Part of the problem is these are all covert activities overseas. And it's a long-going battle, especially in Latin America when I cover it, between CIA's mission and DEA's mission. DEA's mission is to stop the drugs from coming to the U.S. CIA's mission is to get intelligence on criminals. In many cases, they're corrupt government officials in the so-called interest of national security. So they have competing missions. And as a consequence, they're always battling over informants and over, ops, if you will, or operations that they're running. And I am completely certain that continues to this day. It's a bit of a choice between, your moral compasses. Like, what do you, clearly national security in the sense of, somebody setting off a big terrorist attack in your community is a concern. But so are people dying of fentanyl and all the drugs getting into the country. So, my takeaway has always been the drug war is a pretense, and it needs to be completely taken off the map, and we need to readdress how we deal with that whole problem of drug addiction and drug demand, which is fueling all of this. All of this criminal activity is fueled by U.S. demand for illicit drugs. So, there's plenty of strategies out there that have been advanced and tried in other countries we need to look at. We need to really put that on the table up front. We have not done that as a country. Until we do, we are going to continue to see reiterations of Iran-Contra. One intelligence person told me, said, if this operation was even half successful, they will just, and it gets shut down, they will just restart it under different shell companies and it will continue. It's effective for them. And on the ICE side, this is a case where a law enforcement agency, for whatever reason, signed on to an intelligence mission that was in direct contradiction of what their policy goals should be or mission goals supposedly are in terms of preventing drugs from getting into the country. So, I can't answer this question.
It's ironic, I think, especially looking at those contradictions between those two agencies and how they're essentially working against one another. And so, I would concur with you, especially on the idea that, quite frankly, the drug war has been a huge failure in every single sense of the word. And, we definitely need to look at some other things. I'm going to translate a little bit of what you said there.
Okay.
Otra vez volvió a decir de que hay dos ideas muy diferentes entre la CIA, que recaba inteligencia, y la DEA, que supuestamente trabaja para parar el flujo de las drogas. Y la comunidad de inteligencia tiene cierta guerra entre ellos mismos para detenerse el uno al otro. Y realmente esto va a seguir y va a seguir y va a seguir hasta que nosotros realmente busquemos la solución y tratemos las raíces de la dependencia de drogas aquí en Estados Unidos. La guerra en contra de las drogas ha sido una guerra fallida en todos los sentidos. I'd like to get before we wrap things up here, I'd like to get your take on a couple of things that have happened within the past 2 or 3 months or so. First of all, it's kind of interesting what you mentioned about looking at alternatives to solving the drug crisis here in the United States. I'm curious if you have heard what Claudia Sheinbaum, the new president of Mexico, stated. She says she does not want to militarize Mexico, but is looking at working on root causes. What are your thoughts on what she will do as president, and will that be effective?
She's got any president of Mexico, even when they're sincere like that, face an uphill battle because the narco corruption is so embedded in the actual government and business communities in Mexico and other parts of Latin America, but frankly, on this side of the border too. None of this happens without money laundering, and that's the key. The banks, we just had a big bank busted for money laundering recently. It continues to happen. In crypto is another big money laundering, ruse that or cover that is used to move this money. So I think she has a big challenge there. As one the House of Death informant put it to me, you got to pick a side or everyone's against you.
Exactly.
Right? You got to pick one of the cartels or all the cartels are against you. And so, I wish her luck, but I do think she's right. We do have to look at the root causes on both sides of the border, and we have to work this from both sides of the border because that corruption exists across both sides. It doesn't happen without corruption in the U.S. and corruption in Mexico.
Me menciona de que tenemos que acabar tanto con la corrupción en Estados Unidos como la corrupción de México. Y le planteé la idea de que la nueva presidenta de México, Claudia Sheinbaum, ha dicho que quiere dirigirse a las raíces del problema en lugar de militarizar las calles, tal como hizo el expresidente Calderón. Y le pregunté qué es lo que pensaba al respecto. Dijo que sí, va a ser una lucha para ella, pero otra vez, tenemos que tratar las raíces tanto allá como acá, porque hay mucha corrupción aquí en Estados Unidos. Another thing that I wanted...
One more thing.
Yeah, go ahead. And then I wanted to ask another quick question if you have time.
Right, and this will be quick. The root causes of the militarization of the drug war also are very closely linked to the immigration issue. People flee communities because of violence caused by the militarization of the drug war, and on both sides. And all those guns in the cartel's hands most of them are coming from the U.S. So we got those are all linked: guns, immigration, and the drug war. We can deal with all three together. That's what we got to do.
And I concur 100% with you. I don't think you can separate those three issues, because if you do, you're going to fail. There's no way you can aptly deal with those issues. You have to look at them as kind of a trinity of issues.
Mm-hmm.
Muy bien, dijo que deberíamos incluir tres cosas para poder tratar las raíces de la causa de esto. Obviamente, armas, el uso de drogas e inmigración, porque hay muchas personas que se dan a la fuga debido a la violencia provocada por las drogas, los cárteles y también armas. Entonces, habría que tratar ese problema. And then finally, obviously, I'm sure you have been following the situation over the past 2 or 3 months about El Mayo Zambada. Do you think that intelligence sources were involved in bringing him over to the United States? Or what do you think about that as a journalist, especially having studied a lot of the capos and worked on this issue for so many decades?
Well, I do think that there's a long history of backroom deals between the U.S. intelligence community, if you will, including law enforcement to a degree at the higher levels, was the divide and conquer strategy. So, it was a big prize to get him on the U.S. law enforcement side. And clearly within the Sinaloa cartel, there were dynamics that encouraged that type of operation to happen. It didn't happen. I mean, I think it was, an internal, schism within the Sinaloa cartel that resulted in him being, basically renditioned into the U.S. But I am certain that, our side was completely aware of, or at least monitoring the situation, and could have, interceded if they felt that it was in the interest of their side to do it. But I don't have any evidence on that. It didn't make a difference, right? I mean,
it won't make a difference because, honestly, as long as there's a demand here on this side of the border, I think you can change leadership, but they're still going to send drugs over here, and we're going to still see the same thing.
Right. The cartels are not like,
they're not stupid.
Corporation. Yeah. You just sow more dragon's teeth if you break up a cartel. It just creates more mini cartels, and eventually one of those rises to dominance. But it certainly increases the violence.
And we're seeing that. And we're seeing that right now. Yeah, absolutely.
And that fuels the immigration problem. even more.
But who's providing the guns? We go back to that one again.
They're coming. Most of the guns are coming from the U.S. And even when we ship guns to Mexico under, to the military and that make their way to the police and so forth, within the military and the police, the cartels are penetrated, and they have factions that will do their bidding. That's proven. That's documented.
Yep.
So it's a tough thing to solve, but I don't think we're even trying.
No, I concur with you there. Le pregunté acerca de la llegada del Mayo Zambada aquí en Estados Unidos, que supuestamente fue secuestrado, y él dijo que nada le sorprende que hay tantos tratos que se hacen detrás de bastidores aquí en este país con funcionarios gubernamentales, que supuestamente eso es lo que pasó. Pero la cosa es que cada vez que uno trae o arrastra a capos para este lado de la frontera, solo se fractura y los cárteles se vuelven más sanguinarios que nunca. Y eso es lo que estamos mirando con los cárteles fracturados dentro de México. Y obviamente, como yo le mencioné, nosotros filtramos las armas a México, y él mencionó de que luego se comparten las armas con la policía, con los soldados, con los militares, porque es un círculo de corrupción que sigue y sigue y sigue. Bill, I would love to continue our conversation. Unfortunately, we're out of time. We need to do this more often because you really have a lot of knowledge and a very unique perspective about the war on drugs and on dealing with money. I mean, you are probably, in my opinion, the number one money journalist here in the U.S. because you know how to get to those records better than anybody else.
Yeah, 40 years of business reporting helps.
It does. And as I say, I've been a fan for a long time, so keep up the good work. And thanks again for being on the show. And again, let's do this again fairly soon because a lot of things to discuss.
Anytime, and hello to all your listeners. You got a good guy there telling you what's going on in the world. Listen to him.
Thank you so much. You have yourself a good one, and we'll chat at you later.
All right, take care.
Muy bien. Ya son las 12:10.
Viernes 18.